Our friend from Sports Illustrated and the man who writes the MMQB every single week. Joining us from Indianapolis, Indiana, Albert Breer. How's the weather, Albert? What's going on?
It's actually beautiful.
Fantastic.
I mean, you remember the Super Bowl here?
Oh,
Rich?
yes. Yes.
It sort of feels like that a little bit,
Fantastic.
like where, and both you and I have been here when it's 0 degrees and there's black ice everywhere.
Yes.
This is actually pretty pleasant. I mean, maybe not quite like what the Super Bowl was, but pretty close.
Okay.
I went for a run this morning in shorts.
And
I'm not wearing a jacket right now. So
wow.
Win-win.
Okay,
yeah.
Very good. Thank you for painting that picture, Albert. I appreciate that. So what is the story of the Combine? What do you got for me? What is it right now? Well, when you're coming in, you're thinking, all right, I need to write a bunch of columns, articles. Like what interests you or do you think is the story of the 2022 Scouting Combine?
Well, as you know, like Rich, like there's two separate tracks here. There's like what's going on in the league in general, and then there's what's happening with the draft. You know, and I think what's going on in the league in general is just I think continued sort of, I guess, I don't even know how the continuing coming together of what's going to happen at the quarterback position across the league. And so, that's Aaron Rodgers, it's Kyler Murray, it's Russell Wilson, and so I think that you'd hope that those things crystallize over the next few days. And by the time you leave Indy, which is a week away from the beginning of the league year, it's a better idea of what's going to happen with the biggest names at quarterback. And then, as far as the draft class goes, and this is, going back 6 months of phone calls and talking to people about it and watching college football. It's just this draft class probably lacks like a Myles Garrett or a Chase Young. Certainly doesn't have a Trevor Lawrence or a Joe Burrow. But once you get past 10, 15, then all of a sudden I think that most teams see it as having really great value. And the interesting thing about that is huge part of it is the backlog of players who went back to school because of COVID. And so you have like a pretty large number of players in general in this year's class for teams to sort through. And I think that's going to hit over the next 2 or 3 years. It's going to continue because there are, the quote-unquote super seniors, guys who, spent 6 years in school, and then, guys who, because 2020 was such a sideways year, wind up coming back in 21. You got younger players who maybe aren't starting as early because of that. So, there's a good depth in this year's group. And, I think some of the positions that people here have talked about, receiver, edge rusher, obviously your Michigan guy could be number 1 overall, and offensive tackle. So there's pretty good quality. If there isn't like a Jamar Chase or a Myles Garrett at the top of the draft for those positions, there's a lot of quality depth at both those spots and at the offensive tackle spot.
So, I mean, what's the consensus going in? And I know this is fraught because it might change going out. In the year that Baker was number 1, it was a no doubt about it coming out of the Combine because he lit it up that Saquon Barkley was going to be first overall, and then we all know he wasn't. But what's the general sense coming in who's first overall going in the Combine?
What's interesting? So, I think, the way most people look at it, Aiden Hutchinson's got the best, I think is the closest thing to a lock to go in the top 2, but things are really fluid with the first overall pick. The consensus I've gotten is that Aiden Hutchinson probably won't make it past the Lions at 2. And it goes beyond just the natural geographic connection. Stylistically, he's a fit for Dan Campbell. Obviously, from a culture standpoint, he's everything that both Campbell and Brad Holmes want. So, I think, if you were talking about a sure bet to go in the top 2, I think it's Aiden Hutchinson. I think what's happening at 1 is fluid because there are teams that believe Aiden Hutchinson is the best player in the draft. Kayvon Thibodeau obviously has, considerable upside, so you maybe consider him, up there too. But then there's some really good offensive tackles. And the one name that I think people are going to come out of here talking about is the NC State offensive tackle, Ikem Ekwonu. And he, I'm told, is going to test like Tristan Wirfs did, a couple of years ago, where not only is he going to run a fast 40, but he's going to blow out all the physical testing. And, it's early, but I've already heard the Jaguars connected to him, which makes sense because if you look at the offensive lines that Doug Peterson won a Super Bowl with in Philadelphia, there were a lot of really athletic linemen, and that's what Ekwonu is. So, I think, my guess would be that the first overall pick is going to be one of the 4 The two tackles, Aquanu and Evan Neal, and then one of the two pass rushers, Aiden Hutchinson or Kayvon Thibodeau. But I think the first pick's a little bit more fluid, where most people, I think, look at the second pick and they're like, yeah, if Aiden Hutchinson slips by one, the Lions are taking him at two.
Albert Breer from the MMQB Sports Illustrated here on the Rich Eisen Show. Then let's now move to what's going on outside the combine. And last year, Russell Wilson was that disgruntled NFC West quarterback that nobody really kind of saw coming. There were some rumblings or something about that, and then we heard a list of teams that he would be considered maybe not being a Seahawk anymore, and then nothing came of it because he never really demanded a trade. Now we've got Kyler Murray, whose agent sent out a treatise on an excellent piece of stationery yesterday, and after having thought about it, Albert, my only thought is, why do this unless you're priming the pump or trying to speak to the jury in advance of demanding out if you don't get what you want? Is that a possibility that Kyler Murray will eventually say, the contract that's on the table, if I don't get what I want long term, I'm going to demand a trade. I'm done with the Cardinals. Good luck.
Here's what I think is unique about it, is that coach and quarterback are so aligned. And I'm sure you've had people tell you this, they have the same agent. I think, the primary reason why the Cardinals were willing to move off of Josh Rosen in 2019 and go with Kyler Murray was because Cliff had such deep belief in Kyler, right? And really thought, this is the guy we need to build around. I think so much of where Kyler is ties right back to Cliff. And here's why. This is what I think is really unique about it. You go back to the last week of the last week of the Cardinal season. Obviously, didn't go the way they wanted, right? So they lose that game in pretty ugly fashion to the Rams in LA. And my understanding is that was an uncomfortable, awkward week in that building, and they had a personnel meeting, a normal personnel meeting at the end of the year, abruptly canceled. Other coaches didn't know whether or not they were safe. And so for, a good week there, people in that building were very, very uncomfortable, feeling like the owner might do something, and that, and eventually that settled down. But there's been no declarative statement coming out Cliff's our guy, and Cliff's going into a contract year too. So, I think beyond just this being the sort of decision point, which you and I have talked about, where after 3 years, it sort of becomes decision time for teams on their first round quarterbacks. There's also that second piece to it where, I think Kyler feels like if he waits, right, and the Cardinals have already started to kick the can down the road on him contractually, if he were to wait till after year 4, well, is Cliff going to be gone then? And then the idea of getting a new contract's out the window altogether. That's why I think it's just such an interesting situation. And I don't think that this should be overlooked either. Kyler's former college teammate, Baker Mayfield, wound up waiting for a year. And he was eligible for a contract last year, didn't get one, and now where's he left? So I think that there's a number of different, factors that sort of play into Kyler's urgency to try to get a contract now.
But if they moved, they completely upended their plan to draft him. The plan being Rosen and Wilkes. Now, obviously, Rosen and Wilkes, quarterback coach combination, they just didn't want to go down that road anymore, or Murray made them change their mind. But the bottom line is they totally blew it up, right, for him, correct?
100%.
And then they wound up adding DeAndre Hopkins for him. And they clearly have been, all about, guys, let's get James Conner. Let's do all of it. Bring in as many players as they possibly can. Zach Ertz, midseason. Just keep on improving. The coach is close to him, and so put it all together is where does the bad blood come from? Where does the Instagram account being scrubbed come from? Where does the feeling the need to put out a statement that leads folks like myself to wonder, okay, the only reason to do this is to say, when I'm out of here, don't blame us. I've already let you know through my agent that I desperately want to win a Super Bowl, and I absolutely want to be your long-term quarterback. Where's the disconnect here?
Three magic words that can guide you everywhere you need to go in the NFL, Rich, and you know what those words are. Follow the money. My understanding is they did, and I think Eric Burkhart, his agent, put this in the letter, but they did approach the Cardinals about a deal, and the Cardinals basically told him to stand down and said, we'll take care of you, but it's not going to be right now. It might be later in the off season. That's my understanding of how that went down. And so, I think that Kyler's hyper aware of the fact that, again, this is sort of when you, in this system that's been in place since 2011, make your decision on your first-round quarterback, whether or not you're going forward with him or not. And if you look at the history of it, after year 3 is when Josh Allen got a deal. It's when Deshaun Watson got a deal. It's when Patrick Mahomes got a deal. It's when Carson Wentz and Jared Goff got deals. So teams that have been assured that they have the right guy will typically do deals after year 3. So this feeling that maybe they're not going to do a deal with me now, and then again, like looking at what it could look like in year 4, having seen what happened with Baker in Cleveland and having the relationship with Baker, and then maybe looking at it and saying, is Cliff going to be here in my 4th year? Like if you're asking in my 5th year, if you're asking those questions, well then, yeah, I think that's where you say, if they're not paying me now, is there some sort of ulterior motive there where they don't want to hitch their wagon to me because they think things could look significantly different a year from now?
So,
and it's a fair thought. If you think of, to me, like it's a fair thought because like you've seen the way these things go with guys who wait. And like, look at Baker Mayfield right now. A year ago, you might have said, yeah, the Browns are going to take care of him at some point. Now it looks like they may never take care of him. So I understand where that thought comes from.
So are we seeing a new normal in a way, Albert, or just a settling in after having the system be the way it is, 5-year contracts for first rounders? After the 3rd year, you got to pick up a 5th-year option. That we're now seeing that if a quarterback doesn't get a deal after year 3, that's now a breaking point. Is that what we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think it's sort of the trade-off with the rules because, the owners were adamant about putting that rule in 2011 because they had players come back after 2 years and hold out. Like, you remember the Chris Johnson holdout all those years ago. That was after 2 years. So they wanted to make sure that they'd be in a position where players would have to wait until the 3rd year. The problem with that, the flip side of it is you take away the gray area and you really like draw a line in the sand there where it's like, if you really love me, then you're going to take care of me as soon as you can. And as soon as you can is after year 3. So, I think for players, and it's not just the extension, it's also, you got to make a decision on the 5th-year option, right? So, players are thinking about those sorts of things in advance, and you get after year 3 and you feel like your team may be kicking the can down the road a little bit, and you're not in as secure a position as, say, Andrew Luck was, who waited 4 years, or Cam Newton was, who waited 4 years. And, I think there's definitely that in the back of your head where it's like, maybe I'm not going to be here long term. So, I think you look at the history of the last 5 years of what's happened after 3 years with quarterbacks who were drafted in the first round, and the history tells you that teams that are very sure about the guys that they have take care of them after the 3rd year. And I think because that history is now built up, quarterbacks who aren't taken care of after the 3rd year are going to see it as a red flag.
Well,
obviously Kyler does.
Right. Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show, because it used to be prior, you said 2011, that was the year of the lockout where I lost my hair and you had to keep getting new pairs of shoes because they were worn out of you standing on a street corner in Washington, D.C. with us talking to each other on NFL Network, is that, owners in the NFL, sick and tired of giving kids who had not played a single down in the NFL the most amount of money in the history of their franchise because they were drafted first overall, just like Matthew Stafford, for instance, when he came in. Highest paid player in the history of the Lions, boom. They say they want to see a few years on the field before making somebody the highest paid player in the history of the franchise. And thus, this new system came in. But at the same time, they also wanted to make sure they could win a Super Bowl in that first contract because they didn't have to pay that person that much money, and you could pay other people around him, and you could win, and that's the jackpot. That's what happened with Russell Wilson when he was drafted in the 3rd round, though, but that's what happened with Mahomes. That's the jackpot. You're saying now, though, that prospects are pushing up right after year 3, so maybe teams need to make sure that they leave some money for year 4 and 5 to do that now. I'm just fascinated by this subject matter, because when it all comes down to it, Murray clearly is generationally talented. Why won't the Cardinals pay him then? What's the point in that?
I mean, and that's the question that they're going to have to answer here. Like, why they haven't been more aggressive to pay him. Because, I mean, look, the fact is they have gotten better 3 years in a row. Now, I know, the ends of these seasons haven't gone the way they wanted. But, what Cliff and Kyler walked into was, arguably the worst situation in the league. And the roster was 32 out of 32 when they got there. The record was 32 out of 32. And they won 11 games this year. And they've progressively gotten better year by year. And so, I don't know what the hesitation is, but clearly, Kyler is worried that this could lead to something other than him getting a contract extension over the summer. Because, again, my understanding is, what they've said to him is, we'll take care of him just later in the offseason. And clearly, it seems like Kyler doesn't fully trust that. And maybe, again, it's because he feels like he's tied to Cliff. And because if Cliff's on shaky ground, maybe that means he's on shaky ground. To me, it's fascinating because it's unique. You see certain parts of it, like you're talking about, Rich, where it could be a trend, like the year 3 thing, the after year 3 thing. But on the other side of it, there's stuff that's very unique to this situation, such as the relationship between Kyler and Cliff specifically.
And then there's the case of Lamar Jackson, Albert Breer. And now, before I let you go, I want to talk Lamar here, because we've already just talked about how Baker Mayfield was told to wait. And now, waiting that 4th year instead of getting the contract after his 3rd year, we're wondering if the Browns are going to just let him play it out and then move on from him. And then you've got Kyler Murray, who might be like the first guy to test this system by saying, if I don't get my contract after year 3, I'm out. And in the middle of all of it is Lamar Jackson, who's unsigned because he's representing himself and really doesn't feel the need to get around to it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and I think that that's unique for that reason, because he's representing himself. And I don't know if you've ever personally talked to a contract negotiator on the other side of the table without having an agent do it for you, Rich, but I have, and I know I know how that can feel sometimes. You know what I mean? So. That's the tough thing about this one is it's delicate because, where do you come in? You maybe feel like you can't come in too low if you're the Ravens, and you just have to handle it in a different way, because if the player himself's on the other side of the table, you want to be cognizant of the relationship without the buffer there of an agent to take care of it. So. It does seem like, and listening to Eric DeCosta talk, the general manager there, it does sound like they're very cognizant of what Lamar wants, and they're cognizant of what his timeline is to get paid. And it does feel like the relationship there is in a really good place. And that is so key specifically in this situation because Lamar is representing himself. And so I would expect that something will get done before the season, but until it's done, it's not done, So
right.
We'll see where it goes, and usually those negotiations, there are bumps along the way, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes with a star quarterback when he doesn't have an agent sort of providing that buffer for him.
Yeah, DeCosta was talking just a few weeks ago, Albert, and I played that soundbite on the show too. That it sounded like him saying whenever he's ready, we're here, we're ready to talk, but we're going on his timetable, that's what it sounded like to me. And normally, so you got one guy in Murray who's time's ticking, folks. Year 3's over, and despite the way that things have finished out all 3 years, I'm clearly generationally talented. Where's my money? It sounds like the other guy's yeah, we'll get to it. Am I wrong, or is that?
No, you aren't, and it's sort of interesting because if you've been around Lamar, it's not surprising that he'd be the guy to do that, right? he's just got a different way about him. And, I'm sure he wants to get paid like everybody wants to get paid. But I don't know that it's like as front of mind a thing for him as it is for some other people, And so, I think that there's just I think for somebody like Lamar, that again, the relationship with the team is so important. And the fact that he's got this approach where, he really it's almost like a school pride thing with him. The Ravens program has become his program, And I think the Eric DeCosta, John Harbaugh, they're all cognizant of what he's meant to them and how just linked they've become to him because of the way that they sort of turned upside down what they do offensively and made it work for him. And they've developed him and all that different stuff. And so I think the relationship carries them through. But yeah, it's definitely a different approach and how just cool and calm and trusting he seems the whole situation. Like you said, it's almost like the opposite of the way Kyle's approaching it.
It really is amazing to contrast. Albert, I'll see you out there in Indy, heading there tonight.
Absolutely.
We'll see you soon.
Safe trip out here, all right?
Thanks, brother. You too. I'll see you soon. Albert Breer, everybody follow him. A must follow. Always love my chats with him, man. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.